From The Australian, here's what's on the front. I'm Kristen Amiot. It's Tuesday, July 15, 2025. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese will meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping in Beijing on Tuesday. He'll stick to his election pledge to take back the port of Darwin from Chinese ownership, defying demands to abandon the plan. The Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry says the government's emissions reductions target is getting in the way of productivity. They're urging the Prime Minister to aim lower than the current 65 to 75% goal. Those stories are live right now at theaustralian.com.au. A 60-year-old man only discovered his $1 million super balance was probably lost when he made plans to retire. Today, we delve into the chaos enveloping the First Guardian Master Fund and how directors bought Lambos while investors' retirements slipped away. Before we start, this story contains serious allegations that haven't been proven in court, and neither David Anderson nor Simon Selimaj have responded to the Australians' requests for comment.
The world has entered the fourth industrial revolution.
This is how the luxury car manufacturer Lamborghini introduced its game-changing model, the Urus, to the world in 2018. It's billed as the first supersport utility vehicle in the world, merging the soul of a super sports car with the practical functionality of an SUV. The concept was so new, Lamborghini had to invent an entire integrated manufacturing process around it, doubling the size of its factory in Italy.
The new Manifattura Lamborghini, the first Industry 4.0, is no longer impossible, since we made it possible.
In Australia, a late-model Lamborghini Urus will set you back about $500,000. And, back in 2023, a Melbourne investment fund allegedly splurged on the flashy SUV, using the superannuation of thousands of ordinary Australians.
We know from the liquidators that Falcon Capital purchased the Lamborghini Urus in 2023. It was found in the possession of the founder of Falcon, Simon Selimaj.
Cleona O'Dowd is a business reporter with The Australian.
Simon Selimaj and David Anderson are both directors of Falcon Capital. That's the responsible entity of First Guardian. They're also heavily involved in the fund. So Simon was the chief investment officer. David Anderson was the chief executive officer until last year. ASIC has made allegations against David Anderson, including that he bought a property in Hawthorne, a lovely part of Melbourne, in 2020. And a few months before he bought that home, the regulator is alleging that money started flowing from the fund into his own personal bank accounts. And between 2020 and 2024, this was millions of dollars, about $5 million. At the moment, the regulator is alleging that he made at least one mortgage payment with that money. They haven't said whether he purchased the property with any of that money, just that the one mortgage payment was made.
The Australian Securities and Investments Commission, that's ASIC, is pursuing Falcon Capital and Anderson in court over the alleged misuse of investor funds. Earlier this year, the federal court granted ASIC's application to freeze Anderson's assets while it investigates. Selimaj's assets were also frozen earlier this month. First Guardian was suspended in May of 2024, and a liquidators report suggests Selimaj and Anderson allegedly presided over what Cleona calls a Ponzi-esque scheme. A Ponzi scheme is a fraudulent operation where cash from new investors is used to pay returns to those who've been involved for longer. The world's biggest Ponzi scheme was operated by American investor Bernie Madoff until 2008 and was believed to be worth about $65 billion.
Madoff wiped out the life savings of thousands of people, the investments of universities, charities, and celebrities.
About 6,000 clients invested just under $500 million into First Guardian's fund. More than half of those people were referred to First Guardian by a lead generation company called Venture Egg. First Guardian is alleged to have paid marketing firms more than $40 million to attract new investors to the fund.
Allegedly, the fund managers suggested that the investors were going to be put into liquid assets, vanilla type products, but in fact, the money was going into very different products, riskier products like illiquid holdings, property projects, farm projects, a sheep farm in WA, Indonesian property lending groups, really products that people did not know that they were going to have their money put into, as well as that they were promising very high returns, much higher than a super fund would promise. And what the liquidators found was that client redemptions were being met by cash funneled in from applicants. So a new subscription would come in, an investor would put their money in the fund, that would be transferred to another account and then straight away sent back to the same original account it had come into. And then allegedly the money would be sent out as part of a redemption.
ASIC also says First Guardian's responsible entity, Falcon Capital, invested hundreds of millions of dollars in companies associated with Anderson. Cleona says that's the opposite of what a responsible entity is supposed to do.
And part of the big problem here is that the people that were leading the responsible entity were also in charge of all of the investments in the fund. So Simon Selimaj set up Falcon Capital, and he and David Anderson were directors. Allegedly, they were using investor money as they saw fit to make these investments. So there was no external oversight of what was happening. That's the big problem here. And that's what some people are saying needs to change. And that there should never be the same people running a fund and in charge of the responsible entity, because you need external oversight.
When First Guardian was suspended last year, Falcon Capital told investors there was no cause for alarm. It was just restructuring. But it's never reopened, and that means people can't access their cash. Even if they could, it's unlikely they'd recoup their full investment. While First Guardian boasted their assets were worth about $500 million, liquidators say the true value is about half that, and that includes that Lamborghini. What's more, many of the investors caught up in this debacle didn't actually know their money had been tipped in.
This is one of the most shocking aspects of this case, actually. The whole point of having an advisor is they walk you through what you're going to be invested in. You have some assurances from them. What was happening here, not in all instances, but in some instances, and we've seen proof of this, allegedly, the advisor was giving the clients a statement of advice. That's the full document outlining what their money was going to be invested in. And it showed very vanilla investments, plain old ETFs that many, many people are invested in across the world. Vanguards, beta shares, that kind of thing. So the client assumed they were investing in that. And then within weeks or months, allegedly, the advisor was switching them, shockingly, into Shield and First Guardian without their knowledge, in some cases, without their consent. Now, Ferris Murray, who ran Venture Egg, the main advice house that put clients into these funds, he says he was operating what he calls a negative consent model, where he would send an email to a client saying, I'm going to make these changes for your investments. And if they didn't respond within 7 days, he and his advisors, they just went ahead and did it anyway. Now, this negative consent model, I've asked a number of advisors. Nobody has ever heard of it. This is not something you can do if you're an advisor. Advisors need to get informed consent from their clients. That means the client needs to come back and say, yes, go ahead, make the switch. I understand what you're doing. A lot of the investors are holding out hope that the money is there and that it's just frozen. And when it's unfrozen, they'll get their money back. I'm not sure I hold that view, if I'm honest. It seems to me like a lot of the cash was just kind of wasted on these projects that David Anderson wanted to be involved in, wanted to be part of a restaurant empire, so they loaned out money to a restaurant group, wanted to be part of a brewery, so they loaned out money to a brewery. He doesn't seem to be a very good investor. And what the liquidators found was that the fund did a lot of loans over the short period that it existed. Hundreds of millions of dollars of loans, and none of that money has come back into the fund. It does break your heart. I spoke to one man who had $1 million in super, and he's 60. He's not making that money back. All of his money was in First Guardian. He had an advisor who told him that First Guardian was a diversified fund, low risk and suitable for him. This was 5 years ago. So he was 55 at the time where he got this advice and told that it would generate good returns for him and his wife. And now they're both 60. They hoped to retire last year. They went to start that process, and that's how they found out that their money was at best frozen.
Coming up, how the corporate watchdog stumbled across a super disaster. The disaster unfolding at First Guardian Master Fund was uncovered by ASIC almost by accident when they were poking around the books of Melbourne property developer Paul Chiodo. Here's Cleona O'Dowd.
He is a Melbourne, I would say, wannabe property developer who, again, we're looking at a responsible entity that was linked to a fund. So he had this fund, Shield Master Fund, and he was also a director of its responsible entity, Keystone Asset Management. Now, he had a number of property development projects on the go. They don't seem to have gotten off the ground or gotten anywhere. Actually, David Anderson was a director on at least one of those development projects, and Falcon Capital, up until 2021, was the responsible entity for Paul Chiodo's fund. So in 2021, Falcon arranged to no longer be the responsible entity. They passed that over to Keystone, but they still had their holding in a Chiodo property fund. They're saying that holding was a little shy of $100 million and that they had arranged to sell that in early 2024, right before they suspended redemptions. So we know ASIC was looking into Falcon and First Guardian from around March 2024. And by May, Falcon suspended redemptions out of First Guardian. So people could no longer get their money. Now, we think that what happened was ASIC started looking into Paul Chiodo in 2023, and they haven't confirmed this, but we think they may have seen the connection between Paul Chiodo's Shield Master Fund and Falcon Capital. And that's what got them onto Falcon. The fund had been running since 2019. From 2021 onwards, the fund's assets under management, that's the money that was coming in from investors, absolutely ballooned. And it was a small handful of advisors that were putting money into this fund. ASIC doesn't seem to have picked up on that at all. No one seems to have picked up on that. They only realized what was happening when, by chance, they were looking at Paul Chiodo and there just happened to be a link between Shield and First Guardian.
Cleona O'Dowd is a business reporter with The Australian. You can read her in-depth reporting on First Guardian anytime at theaustralian.com.au.